If you meet yourself beneath these trees, only one of you will leave. That is what the old hunters used to say before the forest took their voices. Aokigahara does not echo, it swallows. Every footstep, every breath, sinks into its soil of blackened lava and quiet death. Even the birds forget to sing here. At the edge of Yamanashi Prefecture, where Mount Fuji casts its shadow longest, lies a sea of trees, dense, twisted, endless. The locals call it Jukai, but in hushed tones it bears another name, the Mouth of Mirrors. For they say in its deepest hollow, there rests a relic that does not show who you are, but who is waiting to replace you. Some believe it's only a story, but in an old police record from 1987, there's mention of a mirror made of wood and blood lacquer, found beside an unmarked corpse. On the back of it, a single phrase carved in crimson. The reflection is not yours. It never was. The mirror was described as oval, no larger than a man's chest, carved from cedar wood. The surface was black and still, not glass, not water, but something in between. The report listed no fingerprints, no trace of origin. The body beside it, male, aged 30 to 40, had both eyes open, and both pupils dilated to the size of coins. The file ended abruptly. The officer who wrote it resigned 2 weeks later. His colleagues claimed he began covering every mirror in his home with white cloth before vanishing from Yamanashi altogether. The forest remembers such things. Locals have long whispered about Kagami no Chikai, the oath of the mirror, a forbidden rite said to grant a final glimpse of the dead, performed by those whose grief could no longer bear silence. It was not prayer, it was barter, an exchange between the living and what lies behind reflection. The ritual, they said, required a mirror carved from the trunk of a cedar that had absorbed human blood. The participant would draw a circle around the object using their own blood, light no flame, and wait until moonlight touched its face. Then when the reflection began to stir, they were to whisper the name of the one they lost, slowly, once, without fear. If the dead answered, the reflection would smile. And if it smiled before you did, your soul would never leave the circle. Most dismiss this as superstition, a relic of Japan's darker folklore. Until 2003, when a man named Arata vanished into the forest. He was not the first to seek what should never be found. But unlike others, Arata left behind a trail, journal entries, digital recordings, and fragments of correspondence that survived long enough for the story to be pieced together. He was 29, an amateur ghost hunter, and a skeptic of faith but not of death. His obsession began when his sister, Emmy, disappeared along the Narasawa Trail. They found her car parked near the entrance, its headlights off, her shoes neatly placed on the passenger seat. In the glove compartment, a folded note written in her hand. If I could see you again, even in a reflection, I would stay there forever. No remains were ever recovered, only silence. In the years after, Arata drifted from one haunted site to another, filming, documenting, searching. It was on an obscure message board that he first read about Kagami no Chikai. The post was short, anonymous, and dated 3 days before his final trip. It claimed that the mirror was real, that it slept beneath a shrine in Aokigahara, and that it could call forth what the forest keeps. The last line read, in all capitals, "Do not let your reflection move first." Arata arrived in Yamanashi in mid-October, the season when mist clings to branches like pale fingers, and every sound feels farther than it should. Witnesses said they saw him buying candles and a bottle of sake from a small shop near Lake Sai. He asked the old owner for directions to the old Komori shrine. The owner refused, warning him that the shrine no longer existed. It had been swallowed by the trees decades ago. Still, Arata went. He carried a small camera, a flashlight, and a recorder. That recorder would later be found near the roots of an uprooted tree. The recovered audio was 3 minutes long. The police never released it, but one investigator years later confided to a journalist what he heard. A man's breathing, the faint rustle of leaves, and then a voice, low, trembling, almost childlike, saying, "Emmy, is that you?" A pause. Then the same voice, softer now, answered, "Yes." The recording ended there. When they found Arata's body the next morning, he was standing upright, as if frozen mid-breath, his eyes wide, his mouth barely open. Beside him lay a mirror, wooden, dark, pulsing faintly as though wet. But the reflection inside did not match the corpse. It showed the same man, yes, but smiling, faintly, gently, in a way that did not reach his eyes. The police covered it with a cloth and carried both body and mirror to the station. Within the week, both the mirror and the evidence file disappeared. The officer who had handled it was found unconscious 2 days later, muttering a single phrase over and over. He was still smiling in the glass. They say the mirror is still out there, buried somewhere in the sea of trees. Those who wander too far sometimes claim to glimpse a faint shimmer between the trunks, like moonlight caught on water. If you look too long, you may see someone standing within it, wearing your face, tilting their head, smiling in silence. And if you take one step closer, you might notice something else. Your reflection is not standing still anymore. By the time Arata reached the forest's edge, dusk had already fallen. The horizon was bleeding into the trees, the last light of the sun swallowed by the canopy that grew so thick it seemed to close the sky. He stopped at the wooden sign, worn smooth by rain and years, its white letters barely legible. Qingmu Keiyuan Shuhai, Aokigahara Jukai, the Sea of Trees. They said compasses failed here, that GPS signals twisted, radios hissed, and every sound seemed to come from nowhere at all. Yet Arata stepped forward without hesitation. He had already memorized the path that no map marked, a trail mentioned in that anonymous message thread. It began near the Narasawa ice cave, where the soil was black and cold to the touch, and the air felt heavy, as though something invisible watched from between the roots. Each step deeper made the world quieter. The wind vanished first, then the birds, then the distant hum of traffic from Route 139, until all that remained was the sound of his breathing and the faint, irregular tick of his camera hanging against his chest. He left a trail of red string behind him, as the locals advised hikers to do, so they could find their way back. But as the forest grew darker, Arata realized the string was not leading out anymore. It was leading deeper. At some point, he began to see the same tree twice, a trunk marked with old white tape once, then again. He wasn't sure when the forest had begun rearranging itself. There was an old superstition among those who entered Aokigahara, that if the forest wished to keep you, it would change your path until you forgot why you came. But Arata hadn't come to die. He had come to see. He reached a clearing after nearly 2 hours of walking, a space where the earth sank slightly, forming a shallow basin surrounded by cedar roots. At its center lay stones arranged in a circle, and beyond them, half buried in moss, the remains of something wooden. He knelt. His fingers brushed away the dirt. A faint, lacquered sheen gleamed beneath. It was the mirror. Oval, wooden, heavier than it should be. Its frame carved with spiraling patterns, almost serpentine, twisting toward the center as if drawn by something within. Its surface was not smooth like glass, but rippled, as though a layer of liquid slept beneath its skin. Arata lifted it slowly. The air around him seemed to bend. The forest, which had been silent, began to breathe again, not with wind, but with a subtle tremor, a deep pulse beneath the ground. He set his camera beside the roots and pressed record. Then from his pocket, he pulled out a small knife. The note he'd found online was clear. To call what you love, give what it once touched. He cut his palm open, the blade sinking until warmth filled his hand. Blood dripped onto the soil, tracing a circle around the mirror. He whispered her name. Emmy. At first, nothing. Only the sound of his heartbeat in his ears. Then a ripple across the mirror's surface, like breath across still water. He leaned closer. His own reflection shimmered, blurred, reformed. But it wasn't matching him perfectly anymore. When he tilted his head slightly, the reflection tilted a second too late. When he blinked, it did not. And then, behind his reflection, another face appeared. A woman, pale, hair falling over one eye. Emmy. She was standing in the mirror as if behind a thin wall of black glass, her hands pressed against it. Her lips moved, but no sound came out. Arata whispered, Emmy, I found you. The reflection smiled. He did not. The forest exhaled long and deep. The air grew heavier, darker. His flashlight flickered, then died completely, though the mirror's surface began to glow faintly, pulsing red, as if lit from beneath. Her smile widened. Her eyes gleamed wet and glassy. And then her mouth moved again, this time in perfect unison with his own breath, repeating words he had not spoken. He took a step back. The reflection didn't. It leaned closer, pressing its face against the inner side of the mirror, its expression contorting. Not grief, not love, but hunger disguised as memory. The circle of blood at his feet began to shimmer, each drop vibrating as though something below was stirring. The soil breathed, expanding, contracting, whispering his name in a dozen overlapping voices. Arata! The voice was not his sister's. It was his own. He stumbled backward, tripping over the camera. Its red light blinked once, twice, then went dark. In that moment, the reflection moved. Not like a mirror image, but like a living thing stepping through a window. Its hand pressed through the black surface, breaking it like water. The skin was pale, cold, dripping red from the fingertips. It grasped his wrist. For an instant, he felt warmth. The warmth of her hand, familiar, gentle, heartbreaking. And then it pulled. He felt himself falling, though his body never moved. The forest blurred, the ground tilting sideways. His vision split, one half still in the clearing, the other in the mirror, staring back. Two Aratas now, one outside, eyes wide, unmoving, one inside, breathing, blinking, smiling faintly as though relieved. The reflection whispered something he couldn't hear. Then it straightened, turned toward the trees, and walked away, carrying his shadow behind it. The forest went silent again. The circle dried. The mirror, still pulsing faintly, fell face down into the dirt. When morning came, the clearing was empty except for a camera, a trail of red string, and a mirror that reflected nothing at all. In the years that followed, hikers claimed to see a man wandering near the heart of Aokigahara, wearing a weathered coat, a camera hanging from his neck. He never spoke, but those who met his eyes swore they saw themselves inside them, smiling, one heartbeat too late. And sometimes when fog crawls low over the moss and the air grows cold, you can still hear his voice whispering through the trees. Emmy, I found you. The first official record is a slip of paper no larger than a palm, folded twice and placed inside an evidence envelope that later disappeared. It is dated October 17, the day after Arata was discovered, and it bears the stamped heading of a small Yamanashi constable's office. The handwriting is blocky, hurried, as though the writer held the pen while shivering. Detective Sato was assigned the case. He had served in the prefecture for nearly 20 years and had seen human silence take many forms. He wrote in his notebook the way men who have witnessed too much learn to write. Short lines, factual, then blank. The file contained 3 photographs: a camera with its red record light dark, a ring of dried blood, and a wooden mirror half buried in moss. On each photograph, the mirror reflected not the clearing, but a faint suggestion of another place. A corridor of shadow, a hint of someone standing just beyond reach. At the station, Sato recorded a statement from the witness who first found Arata's camera. The man had been hiking alone, he said, and had found the device lodged in a root. He swore he had heard a word on the recording before the audio cut off: a woman's name. That testimony was filed under unverified. The physical evidence, however, was concrete. The mirror, heavy and dark, was recovered and bagged. Sato wrote down its measurements, the pattern carved along its frame, and the peculiar property of its surface. It reflected like glass, yet its surface gave to touch as if the palm might sink through water. Forensics sent photographs, samples, and a small swab of the lacquer to Tokyo. The lab returned results 2 weeks later with an addendum. The lacquer contained traces of a resin not cataloged in their database and microscopic proteins that suggested exposure to human blood, ancient and recent. Evidence protocol is simple in its cruelty. Catalog secure, wait. Yet human curiosity insists on exceptions. Someone at the station had unwrapped the mirror to look. A junior officer admitted, in a moment of embarrassed confession, that he had peered into it and found nothing but his own face. He covered it quickly and promised he would not do it again. He kept his promise for 3 days. On the 3rd night, the evidence log shows an entry with no signature and no timestamp. Mirror missing from storage. CCTV footage for the evidence room had a single-minute redacted due to technical failure. The station complained of an unexplained smell of cedar and a smear of red on the locker door that washed away when scrubbed. A small camera placed outside the evidence room door recorded only static for 8 minutes. Sato was the one left holding questions. He logged every irregularity, more out of ritual than hope. He interviewed the officers assigned to the case, each answering with similar tremor. One went on leave and never returned. Another changed his name and moved inland. The junior officer who confided about peering into the mirror was found 3 weeks later on the shoulder of Route 139. His car idling, eyes fixed on the road, hands limp on the wheel. He spoke nothing but one sentence over and over when medics arrived. He kept smiling. Sato wrote in his notebook, in a different hand that frayed at the edges, "Do not presume reason where ritual rules." It was the sort of marginal note men leave for themselves when they can no longer tell whether they are documenting truth or preserving superstition against the cold. A reporter from a regional paper obtained a copy of Sato's preliminary notes and published a brief item. It was not sensational, and it did not name the mirror. It mentioned only that an amateur investigator had been found in the sea of trees and that police were investigating the disappearance of his sister. The piece drew little attention beyond rural gossip, but it seeded rumor. Rumor is a slow and hungry thing. It grew teeth in the mouths of those who like to tell of haunted places over sake. Hikers began to whisper of a frame that sometimes glinted in the moss. A bus driver swore to have seen a man with a camera walking the same loop 3 times, his face blank, his shoulders finally slumping, as if relieved. A ranger at the forest boundary kept a private ledger of calls. Lost hikers, broken compasses, the frequent report of a face that smiles slightly too late. Sato received a call from the evidence custodian 2 months after the mirror disappeared. He answered in the middle of a rain, the kind that makes mountains dark and small. The custodian's voice was raw. He spoke in staccato fragments. He said he had dreamed of the mirror, and that in the dream it turned its face toward him. He had covered every reflective surface in his house with cloth. He had woken to find the cover on his bathroom mirror drawn aside and a palm print on the fog glass. The custodian resigned 2 days later. He left his apartment with suitcases, a photograph of a woman folded inside his wallet. Then, several months on, Sato received a package. No return address. Inside was a Polaroid and a single sheet of paper. The Polaroid showed a clearing in Aokigahara. In the background among trees stood a man in a weathered coat. Up close, his face was blurred, but the photograph's margin bore a smear of red. The sheet of paper contained one line, typed, "He walks now with 2 faces." Sato placed both items in a small drawer. He wrote a note to himself, "Keep," and then beneath it, in smaller letters, "Do not write for those who will not read." He had the look of a man trying to protect something fragile, the last splinter of rationality, from being dissolved. Years later, in quieter moments, he would speak of the day an officer came to see him. The man had been on night duty, running a routine check in the evidence room. He was pale, his voice thin. He said he had felt compelled to look into the bag marked Exhibit A. He had been certain it would be an ordinary object, wood and lacquer, bound by law and common sense. But what he saw made him stagger back. He described with a tremor in his jaw a face inside the mirror that watched him and then smiled. A smile that did not quite belong to the world. He told Sato, it felt as if it wished to go home. 2 nights after that conversation, the officer quit the force. He left his keys on Sato's desk. In an appendix to his file, Sato typed a final line that reads like the end of a prayer or a warning scratched on bone. "We are poor witnesses to that which remembers." The mirror itself vanished from sight, but it did not vanish from memory. It passed from police files into rumor, into postcards sold by markets near Fuji, into the private notebooks of men who collect oddities, and the loose pages of students who like ghost stories. Each telling softened edges, sharpened others. Some claimed to have glimpsed Arata walking the pass at dawn. Others swore they heard a whisper in the fog, a name called Patient as Tide. Sato retired shortly after, his hands steady but his eyes never quite the same. He kept his notes sealed in a box and buried the box with his father's things when the old man died. He admitted once that on certain nights he still dreamed of the mirror turning its face to him and saying in a voice that echoed his own, "You kept the record. Who kept you?" The investigators' notes do not answer that question. They leave instead a ledger of absences, missing files, a mirror that should not be able to vanish, men who quit and men who whisper. They are a map of the way curiosity becomes exchange, how looking can cost more than understanding. Outside, the sea of trees makes no sound to mark its bargains. It receives and it keeps. It remembers the names offered to it, and sometimes, for reasons no ledger can explain, it returns what it has taken in a subtly altered hand. No one remembered when the first rumor became a story. In Yamanashi's small mountain towns, folklore doesn't arrive. It seeps. It begins as breath over sake, then becomes the silence between sentences. And by the time a year has passed, no one recalls who spoke it first. Only that it must have been true. The mirror of Aokigahara was no different. At first it lived only in the hushed talk of rangers, a haunted artifact, buried deep within the sea of trees. But then came the visitors, the urban explorers, the ghost hunters who came with cameras and nerves thin as glass. Each one wanted to see. Each one thought they were immune to old whispers. A year after Arata's disappearance, a pair of university students, Miko and Yunpei, hiked into the forest at dawn. Their phones recorded everything. The footage that survived showed them laughing, marking their trail with ribbons. Speaking of the old tale, if your reflection moves when you don't, you're already gone. They said it mockingly, like a charm against fear. By evening, only one of them returned. Miko was found near the forest edge, her face pale, her voice gone. When the rescuers questioned her, she kept drawing a circle with her finger on the dirt, over and over, whispering a single phrase. He went inside. The police report, never released publicly, described the recovered camera. The last minute of footage was blurred, but for a few frames the reflection of Junpei could be seen, standing in front of a dark shape that resembled a mirror. Except the reflection was smiling, while Junpei's real face was not. The file was sealed. The forest, as it always does, swallowed the rest. In the villages near Lake Saiko, old people began to speak of an Aokigahara offering. It was said that once every few years, when the mist lay low enough, a mirror would appear between the roots, framed in old wood, surface dark as dried blood. No one was to look into it, not even to glance, because the mirror didn't merely reflect. It chose. Some said it was the remnant of a forgotten ritual from centuries ago. A way for the bereaved to bargain with Yurei, the hungry spirits of those who died alone. A blood mirror carved from the wood of a tree that once grew over the grave of a woman who had taken her life there. The ritual was called Kagami no Chikai, the oath of the mirror. It was a pact between reflection and flesh. The offering was simple: one drop of blood for one whisper of the dead. But the rule was absolute: never name what you seek, for names awaken hunger. Those who broke that rule never returned unchanged. Locals tell of a monk from a nearby temple who once tried to purify the forest. He had carried salt and prayer beads, walking until his lantern dimmed. When he reached the heart of the woods, he found an old wooden frame lying face down in the moss. He lifted it to cleanse it with sutra. When the mirror caught his reflection, the monk fell silent. His prayer stopped halfway. The wind died. Later, searchers found his robes folded neatly beside a hollow tree, but no trace of his body. Only a faint mark on the trunk, the shape of two hands pressed flat against the bark, as though someone had tried to push through from the other side. Even now, there are travelers who vanish in the sea of trees. Officials speak of suicides, of despair and disorientation, of faulty compasses, but there are details that never make it into reports. The scent of cedar where no tree stands nearby, a lantern that burns long after its oil runs dry, the sound of footsteps following, always a half-beat late. Some hikers claim that, in the fog, they have seen a man walking with a camera, face blurred, expression serene, and beside him, a woman in white, smiling faintly as though recalling something almost kind. A ranger once confided that when he called out to them, both turned at the same time. But it was not their faces he saw, only his own, reflected twice. Every winter when the forest grows quiet, people leave offerings near the path markers. Salt, coins, even mirrors turn face down. No one admits to doing it, but the offerings are always there. Some say it's a prayer for the lost, others a warning. And there's a saying now whispered by those who dare to enter the sea of trees. If you find your reflection watching you, bow and walk away. For it is not you who are seen, it is you who are being remembered. Once, an old woman from Fuji Yoshida told a visiting journalist that she remembered the story long before Arata's name was ever spoken. There's always been a mirror in those woods, she said. People think it's cursed, but it's only hungry. It doesn't want to kill, it wants to keep. When asked what she meant by keep, she smiled, showing no teeth. A mirror without an image is empty. It waits for someone to stay. In the years since, the story has become local taboo. Tour guides won't mention it. Locals won't point to where it might be. But every few seasons, a hiker vanishes near the same stretch of trail, and searchers find only a broken compass, a dead lamp, or a camera facing the trees. And sometimes when night falls just right, you can see the forest's edge shimmer faintly, as though something were breathing beneath the surface of the world. That is when they say the blood mirror opens its eye. And if you listen, really listen, beneath the silence of Aokigahara, you might hear it whisper a name. Not yours, not yet, but someone's. And that's how it begins again. They say every forest has a memory, but only a few have intent. Dr. Naoya Ishikawa had spent his life collecting fragments of forgotten faith. Prayers whispered into stone, charms buried in household walls, ritual scripts written in ink that faded like the dead breath of gods. When the Aokigahara case resurfaced in the quiet winter of 2009, he was already an old man. His handwriting trembled, his voice carried the rasp of dust and sleeplessness. He called it the echo of reflections. The villagers, he wrote, still avoided speaking the word mirror near the forest. They used other terms: kage mono, shadow thing, utsushi, the copy, or simply it. When pressed, an elder told him, "We were taught that the forest is not haunted by the dead. It is haunted by the living who wish too loudly." Naoya's journals are filled with lists of legends, of places, of words. He believed that the mirror found by Arata was not a singular curse, but part of a lineage of forgotten rituals dating back to the Muromachi period. At that time, during long wars and endless famine, families sought ways to speak with the lost. Monks in exile and mountain shamans crafted blood mirrors from sacred wood, mixing resin with ash and drops of their own blood to bind the boundary between reflection and soul. The ritual was simple in intention, monstrous in practice. It required a mirror carved from the same wood that once sheltered a corpse. The mirror must be placed facing north, where sunlight never falls. The invoker would kneel before it at midnight, holding an offering, blood, hair, or tears, while chanting the name of the departed 3 times. Then silence. If the ritual succeeded, the mirror would respond. The reflection would move, and a shadow not belonging to the invoker would appear. But the exchange had rules. The one who summoned must never touch the mirror and never call by name the image that appeared. The price was always the same: the reflection's hunger for freedom. Naoya traced records of the ritual's last known appearance to a remote mountain shrine that had long since rotted into the ground. He found fragments of scripture burned into cedar tablets, one line repeated in many tongues: "To call across the glass is to trade breath for echo." He brought one of the surviving tablets to his university for analysis. The wood was old, 15th century, but its surface had been scorched unevenly, as if from inside. When examined under magnification, the charred grain reflected light strangely, producing faint silhouettes of faces, distorted and hollow-eyed. Students began to avoid the laboratory where it was stored. In 2011, Naoya returned to Aokigahara with a small film crew for a documentary that was never completed. His notes describe a night spent near the boundary trail, beneath trees so dense the stars could not be seen. He carried with him an antique mirror wrapped in red cloth, one he claimed to have found in a temple auction. The recording equipment captured their conversations, calm at first, then anxious. Around 2 a.m., one of the cameras malfunctioned, its lens reflecting something unseen behind the team. A faint tapping could be heard on the microphone, as though fingernails brushed against glass. Naoya's last entry, written in pencil and later found in his tent, reads, "The forest is a mirror turned toward heaven. When you speak your name here, something else learns its shape." He vanished that same night. The crew found only his satchel and the mirror, its cloth covering gone. The frame had grown damp, yet warm to the touch. In its surface, for a brief moment before dawn, they swore they saw him, not standing, but leaning forward as if pressing from the other side. The footage was seized by authorities. The official explanation cited equipment damage and light exposure, but the few still images leaked online show a reflection that does not align with the camera's position. Scholars who studied Naoya's earlier works noted a disturbing pattern. As his research deepened, his tone shifted from academic to devotional. His later papers read like prayers, not reports. In one of his drafts, written shortly before his disappearance, he speculated that mirrors in Japanese ritual culture had always been twofold: tools of revelation and cages for what must not be seen. He wrote, "The kami do not live in shrines. They live in the moment between your gaze and its return." To him, the blood mirror of Aokigahara was the last remnant of a pre-Shinto cult that believed in reflected souls, that every person carried a shadow self-trapped within their reflection, a perfect copy that envied its confinement. The ritual, Kagami no Chikai, was their attempt to merge those halves, to become whole. But such balance could never hold. One always consumed the other. Months after his disappearance, one of Naoya's assistants, a woman named Rei, received a parcel. Inside was an old photograph of the forest and a note, typed in the same style as the mysterious package Detective Sato once received. The message read, "He walks among them, still teaching the ones who look too long." Rei quit her position the next day. In an interview years later, she said she still sometimes dreams of Naoya's face, not aged but reversed, the scar on his left cheek appearing on the right, his handwriting flowing backward. Today, a copy of the folklorist's record rests in the archives of a private collector. The document's edges are warped by dampness and faint stains, brown, almost rust-colored, blur the ink. At the very end of the notebook, in a space once left blank, a new line appeared sometime after his disappearance, written in his own hand. It says, "Every reflection waits to be answered." When the caretaker of the collection was asked whether he ever opened the glass case to examine the notebook directly, he hesitated. Then with a nervous laugh, he said, "No, because sometimes when the light hits it right, I think I can see my face in the page." Arata opened his eyes. The world around him was drowned in a mist so dense it felt alive, breathing, whispering, shifting. The only light came from the old flashlight in his trembling hand, its beam flickering weakly as though something unseen was feeding on its energy. He stood in the middle of Aokigahara, the sea of trees. Yet tonight, every trunk looked less like a tree and more like a figure, twisted, hunched, watching. The deeper he walked, the quieter the forest became, until the silence itself seemed to pulse, pressing against his eardrums. Then came the sound, a whisper, soft, yet unmistakably human. "You have finally come." Arata spun around, his breath caught in his throat. The beam of his flashlight slashed through the fog. Nothing. Only the crooked roots, the damp moss, the smell of old rain and decay. But when he turned back, the light caught something else. Carved into the trunk before him, almost hidden beneath layers of mold and bark, were characters written in a dark, tar-like ink, thick and uneven, as if drawn by a trembling hand. If you call her name, she will answer. If you see her face, you cannot leave. The letters bled slightly, glistening as though they were still wet. Erita reached out instinctively and froze. His fingertips hovered a mere inch away when the forest exhaled. A low moan rolled through the air, neither wind nor beast, but something human caught between breathing and screaming. The trees shuddered. The soil beneath his boots softened, like it was trying to pull him down. He stumbled back, gasping, and the flashlight slipped from his grasp, its beam slicing through the fog as it fell. For a brief second, it illuminated something behind him, a pair of bare feet standing on the moss, and then darkness. Erita fumbled for the flashlight, hands shaking. When the light flared back on, the feet were gone. Only his footprints remained, but there was a third set now, smaller, leading deeper into the forest. Something inside him whispered, a voice not his own. "Follow them." Arata's pulse throbbed in his ears. He wanted to run, but his legs moved on their own. Each step he took, the whispers multiplied, some calling his name, others murmuring prayers, and one voice, cold and clear, humming a melody he remembered from his childhood. It was the same lullaby his mother used to sing before she died. And as he followed the small footprints into the fog, Arata realized something. The song wasn't coming from ahead. It was being sung right beside his ear. The song ended abruptly. Arata stopped breathing for a moment, his body stiff as if the forest itself had swallowed sound. The fog thickened, curling around his legs like pale hands. He raised the flashlight again, scanning the trees. They all looked the same, tall, suffocating, endless. But then he saw it, a rope, frayed and rotten, hanging from a branch not far ahead. The end of it swayed gently, as though someone had just stepped off moments ago. Beneath it lay a pair of shoes, perfectly aligned, untouched by mud. Aokigahara was infamous for that sight. Shoes, ropes, tents, silent memorials to those who came here to vanish. Arata crouched. The shoes looked old but not ancient. Black leather, with dust still clinging to the soles. There was something tucked inside one of them, a small folded note. He hesitated, then pulled it free. The paper was soft and brittle, but the ink was strangely fresh. "To whoever finds this, I am sorry. She came for me. I didn't mean to look. If you see her reflection, look away. Don't answer when she calls. She looks like someone you love." Arata's hands trembled. His flashlight flickered again. "She looks like someone you love." The phrase echoed inside his skull, over and over, until it became a whisper that didn't belong to memory anymore. He stood, heart pounding, and glanced toward a faint shimmer ahead. A silver glow through the fog, soft and trembling, like moonlight on water. Drawn by something he couldn't name, Erita walked toward it. The trees parted slightly, revealing a small clearing. In its center was a pool, perfectly still, perfectly circular. No wind touched it. The surface was a mirror, reflecting the trees and fog around it, yet not his own reflection. When he leaned closer, the water showed someone else, a woman standing behind him. Her face was pale and almost human, but her eyes were hollow, as if carved from the night itself. Her hair floated around her like black smoke, drifting in a breeze that did not exist. And when she smiled, faintly sorrowfully, her lips didn't move in the reflection. They moved behind him. Arata turned sharply. No one. Only the rustling of leaves. Only his heart hammering against his ribs. He looked back at the pool. The woman was still there, but this time she wasn't behind him. She was closer. Her face filled the surface like an image pressing forward through glass. And then faintly, her voice. "You called my name." Arata stumbled backward. "No, I didn't. You looked." The pool rippled violently, as if something beneath the surface had awakened. The ground shivered. The reflection twisted, melting into streaks of black. And then, silence. But Arata wasn't alone. From the edge of the clearing, figures began to emerge. Not walking, not breathing, but appearing, as if stepping through the folds of mist itself. Their faces were half hidden, some veiled by long hair, others by masks made of bark and bone. All of them moved toward the pool, hands clasped together, murmuring in a low rhythmic chant. Arata could make out fragments of their words, old Japanese, ancient and broken. Kairu, Kagami no Onna, Misuteru na. He realized what he was hearing, a ritual, the ritual of the mirror spirit. His grandfather had mentioned it once, in a story meant to scare him away from wandering into the woods as a boy. They said the ritual was older than any shrine, a practice of repentance, or perhaps summoning, to face your reflection and to see what you truly are. But if the spirit decided you were unworthy, she would claim your image. And without an image, a soul could no longer exist. The chanting grew louder. The fog seemed to pulse in rhythm with it, breathing with every syllable. The air turned colder, heavy with the scent of wet earth and iron. Arata's flashlight dimmed until it finally died, swallowed by the dark. Then in the faint shimmer of the moonlight, the woman rose from the pool. Her body glided upward, her hair dripping like ink. She wore a torn white kimono, the fabric clinging to her skin as if reluctant to let her go. Her eyes opened, and for a brief moment, they looked human, filled with sorrow, not malice. Arata couldn't move. He felt something in his chest. Not fear, not yet. Recognition. That face. It was hers, his mother's, but she had been gone for years. He'd buried her himself. "Mother?" His voice cracked. The spirit tilted her head, her eyes empty once more. And when she spoke, her voice was a whisper of water sliding over stone. "Would you give your name to see me again?" Arata felt his throat tighten. "What are you?" Her hand extended, pale, shaking, trembling with sorrow. "Say it," she whispered. "Say your name. I can't find you otherwise." The air around him began to vibrate, as though the entire forest was listening. The chanting of the unseen figures grew faster, blending into a single continuous hum that filled his skull. The ground beneath him pulsed like a heartbeat. Arata tried to resist. He clenched his jaw, shut his eyes. But something ancient was calling him, something that felt like love, twisted and mirrored back through grief. He opened his mouth and spoke his name. The moment the name left his lips, the forest exhaled. A sound that was not wind, not breath, but the low, resonant sigh of something older than the trees themselves. The figures surrounding the clearing froze, their chant hanging mid-air, as if the very sound had been swallowed. The mist thickened and twisted, and the pool before Arata roiled, black ripples crawling across its glassy surface. The woman in white rose fully from the water now. Her kimono clung to her like shadows, wet and fluid. Her eyes, once hollow, now glimmered faintly with recognition. And then, with a motion slower than thought, the surface of the pool began to bend, as though the water itself were folding, stretching, forming a mirror that extended beyond the edges of the clearing. Arata's reflection appeared, but it was wrong. It moved independently. The mouth smiled before he did. The eyes blinked after he had already closed them. The hands shifted on their own, reaching toward him. And yet it was him. Every detail, every line of his face, every curve of his fingers, perfectly his, but it carried something else beneath the skin. A hunger. He stumbled backward, falling to his knees, heart hammering in his ears. His mother stepped closer, but her hand passed through him, brushing only mist. The chanting resumed, not loud, but inside his skull, whispering in ancient tones. He understood suddenly the words without hearing them. The price of calling is exchange. The shadow takes what the mirror sees. The one who looks will remain. The one who answers will leave. Arata tried to speak, to refuse, but his throat was paralyzed. The reflection grinned wider, leaning forward, stretching beyond the confines of the mirror. The pool's edge seemed to melt like candle wax, and the ground beneath him shivered as if preparing to consume him. Then, as if drawn by invisible threads, Arata's own shadow rose from the mossy ground. It was him, but wrong. The movements were identical, yet delayed, jerky, like a poorly recorded echo. The shadow stepped toward the mirror pool, and the woman's hand reached for it. "It is time," she whispered, her voice both loving and mournful. The moment passed in a heartbeat. The shadow of Arata fell into the pool, its form dissolving into black liquid that rippled and screamed silently. The reflection in the mirror expanded, sliding forward like molten glass. Arata felt himself lifted, weightless. The forest disappeared around him. There was only the mirror, the pool, and that endless gaze staring from both sides of the glass. His own mouth moved against his will, whispering the name of his sister, the name he had thought he would never say aloud again. Then he understood. The ritual was not to bring back the dead, it was a trade. His reflection, alive in the mirror, stepped free into the world, and Arata remained behind, his body frozen, eyes wide, chest rising and falling in a slow, unnatural rhythm. The forest swallowed him as completely as the fog, leaving nothing but the pool of black water and the whisper of a name carried on the mist. The figures surrounding the clearing bowed. The woman in white touched the surface of the mirror one last time. The water calmed. The forest exhaled again, softer this time, like a lullaby, and the mist slowly parted. When searchers arrived days later, they found a small clearing untouched, as if no one had been there. The only sign of what occurred was a circle of moss disturbed around a shallow depression. The faint outline of a mirror, now gone. No footprints, no lantern, no Arata. And in the silence that followed, some said they could see a faint shimmer, a ripple in the mist, like a reflection waiting to be answered. Those who venture into the sea of trees now speak quietly of a mirror that calls your name, of a figure in white that smiles when you whisper to the dead, and of a shadow that may step out while your body remains behind. And always when night falls, the forest exhales, carrying the faintest, most haunting whisper. The trade is complete. The forest never forgets. Months after Arata vanished, the sea of trees resumed its eternal rhythm, quiet, deceptive, and indifferent to human lives. Yet those who lived nearby, or dared to wander its deeper trails, began noticing subtle disturbances, small anomalies that could not be explained away. A ranger on the northern boundary reported hearing footsteps in the fog at night, the soft, uneven tapping of shoes across moss. He called out, but there was no answer. Later, he discovered footprints that matched no human foot. Too narrow, too long, the toes curved unnaturally, like the print of someone pressed between two worlds. In another village, a group of hikers found their compasses spinning erratically near a clearing. Their camera footage revealed nothing at first, only the trees bending in the wind. But when reviewed in slow motion, a figure appeared behind them, pale, motionless, barely discernible, its face shifting subtly, almost like a reflection trying to free itself. One old woman whispered that she had dreamt of Arata, standing in a fog-choked grove, smiling faintly as though watching over the path. In her dream, his reflection moved before him, the two of them separated by an invisible glass. When she woke, her own mirror at home bore smudges that could not be cleaned, tiny streaks of mist-like residue that shimmered in the early morning light. Even Detective Sato, now retired, received an anonymous letter. Inside was a single Polaroid, a shallow clearing in Aokigahara where the mist lay heavy. At its center, a figure stood, hunched slightly. One arm was extended as if touching something unseen. The face was blurred, but the silhouette matched Arata. The handwritten note on the back read, "He is watching, he waits. We are not alone." Scholars, folklorists, and paranormal enthusiasts tried to document the phenomena, but nothing was permanent. Cameras failed, tapes erased themselves, compasses spun endlessly. Those who pressed too hard, too long, returned changed. Some went silent, refusing to speak of what they saw. Others left the region, unable to sleep for nights on end. A few were never heard from again. It was said that the mirror spirit had not been destroyed. It had only moved, lurking between reflections, lingering in glass, water, even polished metal. Sometimes it appeared as a fleeting shadow at the edge of vision. Sometimes it called names in the wind, faint, familiar, impossible to locate. And always the exchange continued. Local children whispered warnings. Never answer if you hear your name. Never stare into the water too long. Never follow a reflection that moves independently. Adults avoided speaking of it openly, yet each knew the story. The mirror was real, and the forest held it still. One evening, a journalist who had been documenting the area arrived at the clearing where Arata disappeared. She set up a small tripod, recording, leaving a notebook open in the moss. Hours passed. No movement, no sound. The forest breathed. Then her pen began moving, on its own. It traced words in trembling strokes. "Do you see me? I am waiting. Your reflection is mine." The journalist ran, leaving behind camera, notebook, and tripod. The footage she left behind captured only mist, faint rustling, and the distant echo of a voice, soft but insistent, repeating a single name. Arata's body was never found. Some claimed he had merged with the reflection, stepping fully into the world of the mirror while leaving the forest behind. Others whispered he had become part of the ritual itself, a guardian of the exchange, beckoning the living to pay their due. The locals who walk the forest at night say you can feel it, a subtle pressure in the air, a tug at your own reflection. If you glance too long into a window, a puddle, or a piece of glass, you may see something staring back, the faintest trace of a face that should be yours, smiling, waiting. And when the wind swirls just right, the sea of trees exhales again. The mist thickens, the shadows deepen, and the memory of Arata, and countless others like him, whispers from every root, every tree, every reflection that refuses to lie still. The ritual continues, unseen. The forest remembers, and the mirror waits. The fog lay thick as velvet over Aokigahara, heavier than any night before. The sea of trees held its breath, listening. Somewhere deep within, a single pulse of movement spread, subtle but unstoppable, like the tremor before a tide. A new traveler entered the forest, a young man named Takumi, drawn by curiosity, skepticism, and a desire to uncover the story of Arata that had haunted the region for years. He carried only a small lantern and a notebook, determined to document what others feared. The villagers had warned him, of course. Whispers had followed him even to the edge of the forest. Do not seek your reflection. It waits for those who look too long. But he smiled, shaking off the warnings as superstition. Hours passed, the path growing narrower, the trees thicker, their twisted branches forming hands that seemed to reach for him. Takumi's lantern flickered, then dimmed, and there, ahead, a faint glow shimmered through the mist, the same silvery gleam that had drawn Arata. The clearing, the pool, the mirror. He approached, heart pounding, mind racing with both excitement and unease. The surface of the water was unnervingly still, a perfect black glass. And there, waiting, was the figure in white, motionless yet palpable, the air around her humming with expectation. Takumi raised his lantern. His reflection should have appeared in the surface. It did. But as he leaned closer, he saw not just his face, but something behind it. A second image, darker, older, grinning faintly. Its eyes held his own, but with a depth of knowledge he had not yet earned. The woman extended her hand over the water. Her voice was a whisper, yet it filled the entire clearing. Say your name. Only then can we meet. Takumi froze. He remembered the stories, the warnings, the exchange. But a strange compulsion filled him. A mixture of dread and longing, a pull that went beyond fear. He whispered his name. Immediately, the surface of the pool roiled violently, sending droplets of cold water across his face. The lantern wavered, light dancing across the trees. His reflection moved independently now, raising its own hand to meet the woman's, a smile spreading across lips that were his but not his. The shadows in the clearing thickened. The forest seemed to lean closer, listening. Takumi's body stiffened, rooted to the spot. The pool's surface drew upward, stretching, forming a mirror tall enough to reflect not just him, but the canopy above. And then, something darker emerged, a figure stepping from within the mirror itself. It was him, yet not him, a perfect copy that bore every memory, every fear, every desire. And behind that, countless other faces pressed forward, reflections of those who had come before. Arata, Junpei, Naoya, countless unnamed souls. They were trapped, waiting, whispering in unison. The trade is complete. The reflection steps free. The body remains. Takumi tried to scream. His voice caught in his throat. His hands reached out, but they passed through his reflection as though it were air. The figure smiled, slowly, cruelly, and mirrored every movement he made. The woman's hand met the reflections, and a pulse of energy rippled outward. The forest seemed to convulse, roots twisting, fog roiling, whispers of countless voices filling every corner of his mind. Takumi felt himself being pulled forward, toward the surface of the mirror, toward the endless black of the pool. He tried to resist, tried to run, but the ground beneath him had disappeared. Only his shadow remained anchored in the soil. And then he understood. The mirror did not merely reflect, it replaced. Every life it touched left behind a hollow form, a body frozen in the forest, an echo in the mist, a whisper that might lure the next curious soul. The woman in white watched, her expression sad but inevitable. She did not strike, did not attack. She simply guided as she had guided all before. Takumi's final thought, as the darkness consumed him, was not fear. It was recognition. He had stepped into the story as they all had, and the mirror had claimed him, as it always would. Outside the clearing, the forest resumed its quiet. The fog settled back into stillness. A single ripple remained on the pool's surface, a faint shimmer that reflected the trees, the mist, and a figure in white, watching, waiting. The lantern lay abandoned on the moss. No other trace remained. The forest exhaled softly, a lullaby of sorrow and hunger, as it always does. And so the cycle continues. Those who pass near Aokigahara in the quietest hours sometimes swear they hear a whisper calling their name. Some catch a glimpse of a pale figure in white at the edge of the mist, and some, if they linger too long near pools, mirrors, or polished surfaces, never return. The sea of trees holds its secrets tightly, and the blood mirror waits, patient and eternal, for the next who dares to look. To this day, the clearing remains undisturbed under the shadow of the mountain, and the forest exhales, quietly, endlessly.